In the game, the movement functions that the player character should have. Usually there are walkers running, turning, jumping, rolling, attack, defense, etc. Different game types. Players have slightly different motor skills. We have analyzed before. In this game we are going to achieve. Players should have the two most fundamental motor skills is to move and rotate. Here we go. Let's implement the control of the player's movement. Client game and web game. Usually a keyboard and mouse are used to control the player's movement. In mobile games, touch controls basically the player's movements. In order to reduce the difficulty of learning for everyone, let's start with the simplest. Key to control player movement. That is, press the SAD key. Control the player to move back, forth, left, right. According to the single responsibility principle, you need to write two scripts. One is used for controlling the player's movement, another for receiving keyboard input. Inside the script folder, create two script files. Consider player movement first. Movement requires knowing the direction and speed of movement. The direction of movement is controlled by a keyboard or joystick. Movement speed. In the project, usually read the configuration file to get the. In order to reduce the difficulty of learning for everyone, let's simplify the operation first. You can set it in the editing later. In our game engine, there is a character controller class. It is also used in 3D scenes. Control the movement of characters or other objects. This class have a simple move method. Use this method to can perform simple movement operations. So let's go to the player node first. Add the character control component. Wait a minute in our custom script. Call this method of this class. Realize the player's movement. When adding a character control component, pay attention to adjusting its parameter values. Make the character control component perfect fit with players. The next step needs to be in player controller TS. Set member variables. such as movement speed and character controller component. In the onStart method, get character. This component then provide a method with parameters used to control movement towards home. The passed parameter is the direction of movement. This method is for keyboard input, called in the update method. Controller node. Add TypeScript custom script component player controller. After adding, can be found in the interface editor. Modify movement speed. Finally, we have to control the movement down through the buttons. You need to convert the keyboard keys to the direction of motion. Then call the custom script just now. The move method in the player controller is enough. In the keyboard input, TS custom script. Add member variable player controller. Its value is initialized in the onStart method. In the onUpdate method, control player movements in real time. So we are in the keyboard input script, encapsulating a player move method, called in the onUpdate method. Here we go. Get user keys in player move method. Convert keys to directions. In a 3D game, direction is usually expressed as a three-dimensional vector. How to convert user keystrokes into motion directions. Notice here the coordinate system. Vertical up is the positive direction of Y. Because the player is moving in a horizontal plane. So just set the Y-axis component to 0. General users are accustomed to pressing the SAD key. Control the player to move back, forth, left, right. In our coordinate system, the front and rear correspond to the Z-axis. Left and right correspond to X. If the user presses the W key, we set the Z-axis component to 1. Press the S key. Set the Z-axis component to -1. Otherwise set to 0. It can be achieved using the ternary operator. Similarly, convert the button add to an X-axis component. Finally, build a three-dimensional vector. Indicates the direction of motion. Finally, when calling the move method of the player controller, pass the direction in. At this point, the test found that the player will fall down because the ground is not supported. Need to add plane. And add colliders to the ground plane. In addition, in order to facilitate the observation of the player's movement, we need pull the camera up to a certain position. Then adjust the camera to the appropriate top view angle. There's a problem here. We press Add Ws. It's going in the opposite direction. Originally we pressed W to go up. Where is the reason for this? The reason is the camera angle. The camera was in front of him. Actually, the camera should be behind him. Is correct. So, let's adjust the shooting position of the camera. Press the W key. Then rotate this camera 180 degrees around the Y-axis. He also rotates 180 degrees. This changes to 0 degrees. Okay, now pull it down. Pull to low. Pull back. Until you see the player here. Take a look. At this time, press the W key to move forward. Press the S key to the back. Press the A key to the left. Press the D key to the right. Okay, that's correct. But at this time of the test, everyone will find a problem. When holding down the WA key or the WD key at the same time, or when pressing the SD key, that is, when it moves at a 45-degree angle, it will become very fast. What's the problem here? Let's trace the code. Because this place is passing a direction vector. Multiply by velocity. When the direction vector is not a unit vector, will cause abnormal speed. So make the player's movement speed fixed. The button only controls the direction of motion. Is to change the direction of motion. Become a unit vector. How do you change the direction of motion into a unit vector? It's a math problem. The normalized property of the vector can be obtained in the engine. Directly get the normalized vector. That's where we are. Perform vector normalization. After the vector is normalized, essentially turning a vector into a vector modulo 1. Students who have problems with vector normalization, you can add relevant knowledge by yourself after class. But at this time you will find another problem. It's just that we didn't press any buttons. Run. The player will move to the right. So what's the reason for this? We debug through breakpoints. Show the direction change before and after vector normalization on the console. Because we just added this line of code. Okay, I found the problem. This means that before the amount is normalized. This means that after the amount is normalized. It is also said that after the amount is normalized, I didn't press any buttons. That is to say, the components in all directions are 0. It's a 0 vector. After 0 vector normalization, it became a motion in the x direction. So you can see that x is 1. Then move to the right. The red one represents x, that's y. So how do you solve this problem? You know, the reason for this problem is that mathematically, 0 vectors cannot be normalized. But in our engine API, encounter this situation, need to return a default value. So 0 vector is set. When normalizing, the value of the x-axis component is changed to 1. It becomes a unit vector with an x-axis component of 1. Therefore, in the game, special treatment is required for 0 vectors. That is, before you normalize, to determine whether it is a 0 vector. Actually, When the direction of motion its vector is 0 vector. It means that players are prohibited. There is no need to call the player's move method. We can just return it directly. No need for vector normalization. Just add a judgment. So far, we've been able to manipulate the player's movement by pressing the buttons. However, did you find a problem? It is the button to control the direction of movement of the player. How many directions does it have? Yeah, only 8. Not flexible enough. We want the player to be able to move in any direction. You need to use the joystick. In the next lesson, we will achieve it together. You can also preview it in advance. Thinking about how to implement joysticks to control the player's movement. After class, I hope everyone realizes it by themselves. Control the player's movement by pressing buttons.